Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to welcome Ted Shue. He's the MPP for Kingston and the Islands to our show tonight to talk about his candidacy for leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. As you may know, the Ontario Liberal Party had a big convention just a couple of weeks ago and is slated to have a leadership contest coming up. They're not quite sure when, and they're not quite sure how, but Ted has indicated that he wants to be that leader and run for Premier of Ontario against Doug Ford. Ted, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Very good. Thank you very much for having me.
Why the heck would you want to become leader of the Liberal Party that can't even fit in a minivan?
I want to help the Liberal Party do better, to serve the people better. And what I see is that we're facing simultaneous crises. And there are some tough problems. I want to tackle the tough.
Why?
People are struggling with housing, cost of living, healthcare capacity, climate change, and the damage from the pandemic. Those are the things I want to tackle.
And why do you think you're the guy that can do it?
Well, I have a different background. I've worked in science, I've worked in business, ran a sustainable energy association, and I have political experience because I was a federal MP as well as a provincial MPP, and I want to take that experience and use it to help the party and serve the province.
Well, maybe we'll get into some of those crises that you talk about in a couple of minutes in more detail and figure out what your potential solutions to them are. But is Doug Ford vulnerable?
I think Doug Ford is vulnerable. It's hard to trust Doug Ford. And one example of that is just the promises he made in public on the Greenbelt, the other promises he made in private that were captured on a video, and then his legislation, which takes land out of the Greenbelt, contrary to his promises. I think that people by the time of the next election will see that Mr. Ford cannot be trusted for what he says he's going to do.
But hasn't he really been governing from the center? You know, I think in that first year of his government, he was governing the way a lot of people thought that Doug Ford probably would govern. And Justin Trudeau, when he ran in that campaign, when was it? You know, a couple of years ago, ran against Doug Ford and won because primarily people's distaste for what Doug Ford was doing. But then during the pandemic, I think a lot of people thought he did a reasonably good job. He listened to the science and he wasn't this right-wing crazy that people feared that he would be. And then he won a majority government. And then in the last couple of weeks, he came out with a budget that people called a Kathleen Wynne budget. So it was a very progressive, high spending, deficit oriented budget of the center. No?
Well, I would certainly say that Doug Ford did not follow the science. If you remember in early 2021, his own science table was saying, don't open up. It's going to cause the pandemic, the virus to spread. He decided to open up, and sure enough, in another month, he had to shut down again. So he wasn't paying attention to his own scientists at that time. And what I would say about the budget that just came out, I wouldn't call it a Kathleen Wynne budget.
Major newspapers did.
Sorry?
Major newspapers did.
Well, I would disagree with them. I think that the Ford budget focused on things like highways and cars and factories, and didn't focus enough on the people that we need for a strong economy. If you listen to teachers in the elementary schools, especially, they'll tell you that there's a lot more disruption in the classrooms now. So the kids that we're bringing up, that we need to, people like us, when we retire, we're going to need a lot of strong workers, a lot of good workers to make the economy strong. And if students are not learning, if they're not learning good habits, if teachers are being disrupted and not being able to help kids grow and learn and be the kinds of people they need to be when they grow up, our economy is not going to be strong. And so we need to focus on people, make sure they are trained, make sure they're healthy, make sure that families can afford to live. And if you're struggling to pay the bills, to find an affordable place to call home, you're not raising your kids properly.
Ted, the Liberal Party's last leader was a policy wonk and was in politics most of his adult life, either politics or in unions. And he didn't resonate with the people of Ontario. Doug Ford is renowned, as was his brother, for connecting up with the common man, the common person. There was this video that undoubtedly you probably saw about him complaining about getting a haircut that was too short just a couple of weeks ago. And it was sort of, his appeal to connect with every person. You've got a PhD in physics. How are you going to be able to connect with every person and compete with Doug Ford?
Well, that's a very good question. You're right that Doug Ford has this certain appeal, but I'll say that I have connected with people. I've been elected 2 times in very difficult circumstances here in Kingston and the islands. And one way that I did that was by connecting with people who are sitting on the fence between the Liberals and the NDP, or the Liberals and the Green, or the Liberals and the Red Tories. I think it's in order to win an election when the Liberal Party is doing really, really badly, which was the case federally in 2011 when I first got elected, and which was the case last year when the Liberals were reduced to 8 seats. It's important to be able to connect to different voters, not just Liberals, but different voters. And here in Kingston, I've got 5 rural polls. I've got to go from farm to farm for part of the election campaign. I also have to go from door to door in the suburbs, and then I have to go from apartment to apartment in the middle of Kingston. So it's really important to be able to connect to all sorts of different kinds of voters with from different places. So I don't let that science background get in the way of listening to people and making people feel like they can talk to me about anything.
We're chatting tonight with Ted Hsu about his announced candidacy to become leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. And is there a chance for both Ted as well as for the Ontario Liberal Party to be successful in the upcoming provincial election campaigns? We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Ted Hsu in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960, where our topic tonight is really the Ontario Liberal Party, Ontario politics, and a gentleman by the name of Ted Hsu, who is the MPP in Kingston, the Islands, who has indicated that he wants to run for and become leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, become Premier of Ontario in competition with our current Premier Ford. And so I thought we'd chat with him and find out a little bit about him and the politics that are going on and what the prospects are for him and for his party. I got to tell you that I've been critical at times about the lack of experience that people have, the lack of real world experience and smarts in politics. And Ted is an exception to that rule. Ted's got a bachelor's in physics at Queen's University, and he's got a PhD in physics from Princeton University. He was a student in theoretical condensed matter physics. We're going to have to try to figure out what the heck that is. That sounds interesting. He's got, in addition, really quite a unbelievably interesting background. He was a postdoctorate researcher at the University of British Columbia, also in the Centre de la Recherche sur le très basse temperature, which I presume is something about temperatures. He was a researcher at the Atomic Energy of Canada. He was a researcher at BNP Copper Nef, an interest rate trader. So then he went into investment banking, it would look at BNP. Then he worked with Morgan Stanley in Japan as a head of equity portfolio trading and options trading. Then a financial analyst in Kingston, the Islands. Then a co-chair of the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum. And then he ran for the Liberal Party of Canada, became the critic for science and technology and federal economic development in Ontario. And that was for the federal Liberal Party. And he became, as I mentioned, a member of parliament for Kingston and the Islands, a communications consultant for a pharmaceutical company, a visiting scholar in the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University, a co-chair of the City of Kingston Mayor's Task Force on Housing, a member of the board of directors of Fields Institute for Research in Mathematical Science, a board member of Switch Ontario, and then he ran for the Ontario Liberal Party and became elected and is now a MPP. Wow. So you were a researcher in physics. You were a options trader and investment banker in Japan. You then became a guy in federal politics, and then a communications person in pharmaceutical companies, and then a local member of provincial parliament in Kingston, the Islands. Can't you just keep a job?
Well, there's a theme there, and it's part of how the modern workforce works. I have certain skills in problem solving, in using math and using computers and dealing with lots of data and trying to figure out what it all means. And that skill is a skill that I've been using in a lot of different jobs, and it's something that people keep wanting to hire for. And so that's how I was able to work in different jobs. But I think I was able to use that in my job in politics as well. It's just to say, let's look at politics differently. Let's look at the numbers and find out what the numbers tell us, instead of just kind of going by feel. That's how I do politics. I do politics a bit differently because I come at it from a different background.
So if we had a job description, and we're doing recruiting for the head of the National Research Council of Canada, or maybe, this last federal budget had a bunch of things that were industrial policy oriented, and we had a job description for the person that was going to become either the head of the industrial policy and clean tech in Canada, you'd probably be at the top of the list. But is Premier that kind of a job?
I think as Premier, you need to be able to listen to lots of different things, because they're all tied together. So housing policy is connected with energy policy. Housing policy is connected with economic growth. It's also connected with fixing some of our social challenges, poverty and addictions. Getting all the pieces to fit together and getting it all to fit together with all the lines in the budget so that it adds up at the bottom. I think that's part of being a leader, as well as connecting with people from all different parts of the province. I don't think that just because you have a numbers background should mean that you won't do a good job as Premier.
Well, given that I've been a CFO and I've got my MBA, I would tend to agree with you, but that's beside the point. So let me ask you then, Ted, if I could. You were chairman of a Kingston Mayor's task force on the housing. You've mentioned housing as one of the big crises that Ontario is facing right now. Premier Ford and the Minister of Municipal Affairs have been really focused on this issue with Bill 23 and Bill 109 and some of the things that they're doing with the big task force that was held a year ago on affordability and housing. What do you think the problem is in housing, and what would you do if you were Premier to solve it?
I think the problem is that we don't have enough middle market and affordable housing. I don't think that we need to take land out of the Greenbelt to build enough housing. And in fact, there's a number of reports that show that. I think what's important is that we allow more housing to be built where people are already living, near transit lines. We should be building more dense housing. So instead of building a single detached house with a big yard, maybe we build a fourplex with smaller apartments that is more affordable and allow people to actually buy a place instead of struggling to pay rent when you have an average job. I think that we can change the incentives so that in rental units, we build smaller apartments, which allow people to afford it. I think the government should be helping with housing that's when people need below market housing because they have much less than the average income. I think the government should be involved in that as well. It's not getting built, and lack of housing is causing all sorts of social and economic problems. Businesses need their employees, especially entry-level employees, to have places to live. And if we want to treat some of our social problems, we need a stable place for people to get on their feet and take care of themselves.
There was a graph that I saw just a day or two ago of inflation and housing that suggested while inflation was low single digits for most of the last couple of decades in the general economy, it was like 40%. in housing, and the graph was dramatic with regular like that, and the housing inflation increases going up dramatically. We are in the Greater Toronto Area spending twice as much of our disposable income on housing as the major American cities are, and our debt as a percentage, our housing debt as a percentage of personal disposable income in Canada is twice what it is in the United States. So housing is a problem. Let's try to peel back the onion on a couple of the things that you mentioned. So the Housing Affordability Task Force suggested that you should have this as-it right opportunity to convert any single family home into a fourplex. So in other words, adding a laneway house or a granny suite or a legal basement or splitting it into a duplex. And there were a lot of people that used the term that you used, missing middle, and suggested that made a lot of sense, and that it was happening naturally but illegally, and or when it happened legally, it was subject to an incredible amount of time delay because of the zoning processes that one had to go through. But the government didn't change that, at least not nearly as much as a lot of people said they needed to and should. What would you do if you were premier? Would you give people an as-it right ability to convert any single family home into a fourplex?
Yeah, I think if you just look at Doug Ford's own task force that gave him a report, he wasn't as aggressive as they were suggesting. I think we can be more aggressive in allowing housing to be built in urban areas. So if you want to, let's say there's lots of examples where people want to renovate an old house, but they can't put up a duplex or a fourplex. They can only put another a single house. So I would definitely be much more aggressive, and in certain places you might want to say, look, you can always put up a fourplex or a duplex, or you can go up to 3 stories. I think we need something like that to encourage more of this so-called missing middle housing. There's another word that people use, attainable housing, but basically it's you have an average job, you can afford to put down a deposit and take on a mortgage and buy your own place.
The reason why a lot of people
against inflation.
The reason why a lot of politicians haven't put that in place, even though smart people have suggested it, is that local residents are against it. They don't want to have a fourplex right next to their single-family home. How would you deal with all those local residents that have come out and clamored very loudly that it's inappropriate?
I think that one thing you can do is you can say, look, here's a couple of cases where you might want to think about, you might be in the same situation. Let's say you're retired and you want to downsize, but you don't want to move out of your neighborhood. You don't need that big house that you have, but you want to stay in your neighborhood with your friends, with your community. If you had a smaller place, you could downsize and stay in your own community. The other thing you could say is, like, your kids, don't they want to live in the neighborhood they grew up in, or at least have a chance to be able to do that? If you had some duplexes or fourplexes in your neighborhood, your kids might be able to buy their own place and live within walking distance of where they grew up. I think there's ways of giving people a picture of what a neighborhood might look like when it's more mixed, and gives you a chance to live where you want to live.
One of the other issues you mentioned is greater density around major transit zones, and the provincial government has called these major MTSAs, major transit station areas, and they are encouraging greater density around all of them, along the Ontario line, along the Eglinton Crosstown, around subway stations, around GO train stations, etc. And again, local municipalities have opposed that. Local people have opposed that. What do you think? In Mississauga, the local municipal city government actually had a cap, a maximum height on density within MTSAs, and the premier and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs actually wrote to Peel Council and said, no, we're not going to allow you to have a maximum height on buildings within an MTSA. What do you think of that?
I think that if you're going to put density around transit hubs, I think that's a good thing. Just make sure you have things that, like schools or places of worship or places to buy your groceries. Make sure that it's a complete neighborhood and not just a giant group of skyscrapers with apartments. That's not a complete community. I think if you did that, it would be more acceptable. But then you have to just tell people, look, do you think we're in a housing crisis or not? And if you think you're in a housing crisis, and I believe that a lot of people are feeling the pain of that crisis, then we've got to think differently. And I think putting taller buildings around transit hubs is one important way. If you look around the world, there's a lot of cities that do that and do that successfully. I would say just make sure we've got schools and shopping for necessities, places of worship, community centers, places for businesses like doctor's offices, all those things that you need in daily life, have them in that complex so that it's really a complete community.
Getting those higher heights and greater density buildings approved in MTSAs or anywhere has been a big challenge where, you know, people have talked about it taking as long to get a project approved as it is to actually get the project built, such that the Ontario government has tried to speed that whole process up with a couple of the bills that have been put forward in government, demanding that municipalities respond within a certain length of time, cutting the abilities to object to projects at the Ontario Land Tribunal, and putting in, I think it was something last year like 57 different ministerial zoning orders that sort of overrode what local municipality zoning was. Is that appropriate?
I think you have to be a bit careful about that, because some of the ministerials, it's putting a lot of arbitrary power in the minister's hands for particular projects, and there's a bit of accountability that isn't there when the minister can just pick a particular piece of land and say it's going to be used for something. I think that it may be appropriate when we're talking about things that society needs the most, like affordable housing projects. But there's a give and take between the provincial government and the municipal government. The provincial government's role, I think, is if you set an overall policy, which is, look, we're gonna give you the ability to build denser housing in urban areas, especially near transit hubs and transit corridors. If you go and you're sticking your finger into particular pieces of land, particular projects in municipalities, then you have to consult more with the municipalities and put some rules around when you can use these ministerial zoning orders.
You're a math guy, you're a numbers guy. Every single economist that I've ever read or heard says rent controls don't work. What do you think?
Yeah, I think in the long run, rent control will reduce the supply of housing. So if you're in a crisis and you need to protect some people, you can have rent control. But in the long run, if you want to have more housing built, you've got to make sure the economics is right. And if you rent control should, I think, not be applied when you need to build more housing in the long run. If you need to protect people in the short term, sure, put in rent controls. But in the long run, you've got to take them off and allow the economics of building housing to work.
Development fees. The provincial government has said development fees were a tax on people that could least afford it, newcomers and immigrants and young people, and were inappropriate ways of raising taxes, and so have reduced development fees fairly dramatically. Local municipalities have cried wolf. No, they've cried loud and said that that's inappropriate. They can't raise the needed money to build infrastructure with the caps on development fees. Where do you come out on that issue, sir?
Well, if you're putting in new housing, you've got to put in new, water lines, sewage lines. You've got to have services, emergency services, roads, snow plowing, all sorts of services need to be put in. If you're taking money away from municipal budgets, it's going to have to be replaced from somewhere else. And I think that the provincial government is now realized that they're going to have to compensate municipalities for that, the missing development charges. Otherwise, municipalities are going to be forced by Premier Ford to raise property taxes to make up the difference.
Okay, last question on housing, then we'll go to some other topics after the break. You mentioned the Greenbelt. Is it appropriate? Was Ford right in opening up development in the Greenbelt because of this housing crisis?
No, we don't need that land. And the Greenbelt is something we need to protect forever. And if it's, Ford takes 0.5% this year and takes another 0.5% next year, it sets a precedent. It's going to add up over time, and eventually we won't have much of a Greenbelt left. If you're going to protect it forever, you can't take away a 0.5% here 1 year and another percent another year. You just have to protect it. When we don't need it, we can build housing elsewhere. We don't need more sprawl that is going to make our transportation problems worse.
So is High 413 needed?
No, I don't think so. I think that Highway 14 is going to, if we built it tomorrow and then we look 50 years from now, I think you'd have a whole bunch of bedroom communities popping up along Highway 14. It would be congested and people would be complaining that they're stuck on Highway 14 all day long. Highway 413 all day long, trying to get to where they need. The problem with building new highways is that it induces development and it induces traffic. And I think in the long run, it's not a good choice.
We're chatting tonight with a member of Provincial Parliament, Ted Hsu, who has announced that he's going to be a candidate for the leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party. He's currently
I'm exploring vigorously. There's no official contest yet, and I'm seeing how much support is out there.
Well, given your ability to answer my questions, I'm impressed so far. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and be back with Ted Hsu in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a lot of fun asking Ted Hsu, the member of Provincial Parliament at Kingston and the Islands, about some policies that he's criticized and that he's in support of, and that he would back if he became leader of the Ontario Liberal Party and Premier of Ontario. He has been very correct in saying that he's exploring his candidacy for leadership of the Ontario Liberal Party when I said he was announced. But it sounds to me like the race, even though not officially on, is sort of on. And they're all out there looking for the potential to get support. Let's talk about the politics of it for a second, or the timing of it, if we could, for a second. Ted, there are some people that think that the Ontario Liberal Party should have a leadership campaign like right away. And elect a leader. I think at the recent convention, you changed the rules from a delegated convention to a one person, one vote, which means that more people can actually vote in that leadership contest. And I think the hope is that will, get more excitement in the population and get more people to join the party and participate. And then other people think, no, you should wait, a year or two until you have a leadership contest and elect a leader. Where do you come out on the timing, sir?
I'm indifferent. I'll go with whatever timing the new executive council of the Ontario Liberal Party goes for. I'm really focused on connecting with people and seeing what they're worried about and what they want to see in the new leader. And I'll go with whatever timing those new executives decide on.
I had a really interesting debate with a very senior conservative that was in both provincial government as well as federal government just this past week. And he said the Liberal Party for waiting is crazy because parties that don't have leaders atrophy. That was his word, atrophy. He said that membership declines, fundraising declines, policies decline, interest declines, and those parties atrophy. And he said any delay is just nuts.
Well, I think the Liberal Party is very far from atrophy. We had a record number of people at our annual general meeting. Lots of people contesting positions on the executive council. So people want to be on the administrative side, on the board of directors of the Ontario Liberal Party, and are willing to fight elections to get elected. And we have 5, maybe 6 people who are exploring a run for the leadership. So there's a lot of interest in running for leader. And just this fact that there are 5 or 6 of us going around the province, seeing how much support there is and talking about what the next policy platform might be and what different voters in different parts of the province are interested in. That's the complete opposite of atrophy. This leadership race is going to every riding is going to count the same. There's this point system. Every riding gets 100 points. So it means we're going to be traveling to far-flung regions of the province to listen to people. And really, the Liberal Party is going to be spreading its wings. It's very far from the word atrophy.
Okay, so let's go back to some of the policies. You said one of our other crises was healthcare. What do you think is the crisis in healthcare? And what do you think of what the provincial government is currently doing about it? And what would you do about it if you were in charge?
Well, I think a good illustration of the crisis, the family doctor situation is very serious. And it's actually especially serious in Kingston. Just as an example, I had a constituent write into my MPP office saying that they're on medication, daily medication for ADHD. It's a young adult who needed that daily medication to be able to work and to have a full life. And so they ran out, they needed a refill. And it's a controlled substance, the particular medication, and that you can't go into urgent care or emergency to get a prescription. You have to see a family doctor. In Kingston, we don't have any family doctors taking on patients. It's very hard. There's only one walk-in clinic, and that one is very crowded. So this person couldn't get a refill for their prescription, which made all the difference between functioning and not functioning in daily life. That's a very typical story. I made a video about it to say, hey, minister, look, this is the sort of thing that's happening. And then I had somebody else that I knew say, hey, I have that same problem. So lack of family doctors is hitting us in many, many different ways. And there's 25,000 people in Kingston who don't have a family doctor. It's an enormous number. What do we do? So I think we should be looking back. It's not enough to just create more places in medical school. If you look at medical school, a lot of students are not choosing to be a family doctor. And if they do choose and they graduate, they're often choosing to not work full-time in family medicine. And we have to look at why. One of the reasons is that the paperwork load has gone up a lot in recent years. And one of the solutions that I'm very interested in is the Doctors Ontario Medical Association has proposed that we create a new position, which they call a scribe, a medical scribe, who focuses on doing the paperwork for doctors and looks at the lab reports that comes back and says, hey, look at this, don't look at that. That lab report looks okay. Oh, you better make another appointment for this patient because something looks wrong in this lab report. And then the doctors can focus on seeing more patients, which is will help to reduce the shortage. But, it also makes the job of family doctor more enjoyable because they get to do what they were trained to do, which is see patients, not do paperwork. So I think there's a lot of things like that we should be looking at. A lot of new doctors, they don't want to have to run a business like doctors used to. They want to practice medicine and not having to worry about their retirement. They want to see patients. And if we set up a situation where being a family doctor is more like you go to work in the morning, you finish in the evening, and you don't have to worry about running a business and dealing with all the things that you weren't particularly interested in when you wanted to be a doctor. We'll probably have more people choosing family medicine. I think that's the sort of thing we should be looking at. Why are people not choosing family medicine when they're a medical student?
The criticism I hear is that you get paid 2 or 3 times more if you become a specialist, and so therefore there's just a great deal of economic interest in not being a family doctor, being a specialist. We also are losing a fair amount of family doctors and other physicians to the United States on a regular basis as people go to a system where they can make more money, even if they have to do more paperwork and deal with insurance and other issues. And then I think another issue that a lot of people talk about is that the population is growing fairly significantly with immigration, et cetera. And we've got people that are moving to this country with medical degrees that we're not allowing in the system. And so we're overly restricting supply. What do you think of those issues?
I think they're very valid. I think that in addition to that, the population is growing older, and when you get older, you need more healthcare. So that's another strain. I know that the people who are coming, who are foreign trained and are coming to Canada, they have the experience and the training they have differs from place to place, and so it's very messy to sort out who has the right qualifications and what additional training they need to fit into the Canadian medical system and the Canadian standards. People have been working on that for a long time, and I think we should be continuing to put some effort into that. There's certainly a lot of good people coming in who just need a certain amount of training and familiarity with the Canadian system, but it is complicated mainly because people come from very different backgrounds, and so you can't simply say that everybody's qualified or everybody's not qualified. It's just a lot of work needs to be done on the details.
Let's talk about industrial policy for a second, and maybe the Ring of Fire and critical minerals and other issues. You know, this federal budget that came out recently had a fairly significant industrial strategy in regards to green tech. You were a investment banker with Morgan Stanley in Japan. You were an interest rate trader. You worked with a pharmaceutical company. What should we be doing in Ontario, if anything, from an industrial strategy standpoint? To make sure that we've got the right technology businesses of the future. Right. You know, I think that there's lots of people that have criticized that companies start in Canada, but then when they need to grow and get financing, they go to the United States. We've got this incredible innovation corridor from Toronto to Waterloo that people have talked about. But it's not like Silicon Valley. It doesn't seem to have had the positive impact, the same impact on our economy that has had. Is there something different that we should be doing in Ontario, like the federal government is doing in regards to inducing more development in tech?
Right. Yeah, I think we should be looking at some of the strengths that we have in Ontario. There's an idea that I think it's worth keeping in mind that if you have a single factory all by itself, and I'll take a local example. In Smith Falls, the Hershey chocolate factory, which closed down. It was replaced a few years ago with a cannabis company. But if you have a single company sitting there all by itself, it's really easy for it to just pick up and move somewhere else, where maybe they get a better offer from somewhere else. But if you have a whole industry, so you don't not only the one factory, but you have its suppliers, its customers, all the services for it, legal services, training, transportation services. If you have a whole industry, it's very hard for any one of the companies to pick up and leave. And so what we should be developing is what they call ecosystems, where you have these different companies, they do business with each other, they rely on each other, they service each other, they buy and sell from each other. If we develop that in Ontario, it'll be very hard for individual companies to leave. And so I think
How do you do that? How do you develop an ecosystem?
I think that we should be looking at you can't do it for every part of the economy, but there could be parts of the economy where we're strong. And let me go back to critical minerals and the Ring of Fire. I think that we should not be just looking at the mining, but we should be looking at all the processing that occurs between when you extract the ore and you have components of a automobile battery that you can assemble in a factory. All that processing, we should be trying to develop companies that are part of that process. In Kingston, we have a number of chemical processing companies. And it's going to, I think, fit very well into this, to the critical minerals, the green tech strategy of Canada and Ontario. I think that we're very strong in artificial intelligence and all the technology between Kitchener-Waterloo and Toronto. In those areas, we should make sure that we encourage different companies and their customers to be located in the same place. All the services should be located in the same place, and it'll be very hard for companies to pick up and move. There's different automobile manufacturing, all the different suppliers that go into the automobile value chain. We should be encouraging that in Ontario. I have to acknowledge that is happening with the move towards electric vehicles, but we should make sure that all the parts suppliers in Ontario stay in Ontario. I think as we move to electric vehicles, there is a lot of, for example, in Windsor, there's about 300 small and medium-sized businesses that supply the automobile industry. A lot of them are family-owned, and they're going to have to do this transition from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. And they're all connected to each other. They all do business. They don't want to move far away because then they'll not be connected with the rest of their industry and all the people they need to do business with and they need to be close to. We should be making sure that they do this transition to electric vehicles and stay in Ontario so that the jobs stay in Ontario.
You mentioned that climate was one of our crises as well. You were co-chair of the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum, and you were executive director of Switch, Kingston's alternative energy cluster. So you've got some real experience in climate change and in ecosystem development. Are we doing enough in Ontario on climate change?
No, we could do more. One of the things that I was disappointed with the Ford government is when they first took power, 2018, 2019, they decided to trash renewable energy projects and stop conservation programs. So we lost a couple of years. I think right now they realize that they've lost a couple of years, and so they're pushing again energy storage, renewable energy, energy conservation. But we did lose a couple of years, and we need to do more. It's something, we're going there because we have to go to an economy where we're not relying on burning fossil fuels. We know that we have to end up there in 10, 20, 30 years because the climate change is forcing that on us. So why not prepare for that new economy that is going to be based on other energy sources, everything from wind and solar, hydropower, nuclear power, and whatever else is coming in the future. Let's get prepared for that. Let's make sure that Ontario's economy is prepared for that. Let's make sure that Ontario workers are doing the jobs, are ready for the jobs in that new economy. And I think that's going to be not only important for Ontario to contribute to the global fight against climate change, but it's going to make our economy stronger.
Ontario, really reduced our pollution fairly dramatically and got off of coal because of the investment in nuclear power. 10 years ago, the typical environmentalist would have been really anti-nuke. Today, some still are, but some will say that nuclear power is the only way that we're going to have reasonable development off of hydrocarbons. Where do you stand on nuclear power, sir?
Yeah, I think if you look at the numbers, we rely a lot on nuclear power now, and we're going to rely a lot on nuclear power in the future. We're using electricity for so many things to replace burning fossil fuels. So we're converting automobiles to electric vehicles so that we don't burn gasoline. We're going to be converting our home heating, maybe starting in the south of Ontario. We're going to be converting that to heat pumps. So we're going to be using electricity instead of burning natural gas. We have been converting our steel factories instead of using coke, which is a form of coal. We have been converting to electric arc furnaces using hydrogen to pull the oxygen out of iron oxide, iron ore, to make steel. So we need more and more electricity. And if you just look at the numbers, we absolutely need the nuclear energy that we have now, and we're going to continue to need it for decades to come.
We're chatting tonight with Ted Shute, who is a member of provincial parliament in Kingston and the Islands. He's announced that he might be interested in becoming leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. We're going to take a final break for some messages and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Ted Shute, who is the member of provincial parliament for Kingston and the Islands. He's a Liberal member of parliament, member of provincial parliament, and he's announced that he's interested in running if and when they have a contest for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. Ted, in the last election, the Liberals and the NDP got about the same popular vote. But the NDP got something like, 3 or 4 times as many seats. And you know, the Conservatives, you know, I think the statistic was, you know, 1/3 of the number of votes to elect MPPs as it did for the NDP, and 1/6 as many votes as it took to elect a Liberal member of the provincial legislature. Is there something wrong with our political system?
Well, I think what happened last election, the NDP were really focused on keeping the ridings that they held. So they lost some seats, but they held a whole bunch of seats. The Liberals came second to the Conservatives in a lot of ridings. We were battling the Conservatives in a lot of places. We came second, and as a result, we didn't get as many seats. What I would say is, you know, I do like some proportionality in our electoral system, and one of the reasons for that is if you with this first past the post system, you'll get big parts of the province with no representation. So I think an extreme example of that in 2015, the Liberals, federal Liberals, won every single seat in Atlantic Canada. And so the other parties didn't have members of their caucus who could speak for Atlantic Canada. And a lot of really important conversations happen in closed doors where caucus members speak up, they criticize the leader. And if you don't have a voice from a particular part of the country or from the province, that's a problem. So I have a favorite system of proportionality. It's called regional top-up. And basically the way it works is if you don't get any seats, but you get a lot of votes in some area, then you get an extra seat in the legislature for somebody from that area, so that you make sure that you have a voice in the caucus from every part of Canada or from Ontario, so that the leader can hear criticisms from that part of the province, somebody who cares about that particular part of the province.
Assume that you have won the Ontario Liberal leadership. It's the leadership debate tonight. You're standing there against Premier Ford, and the moderator turns to you and says, your opening comments, sir, you've got 2 minutes to say why the people listening tonight think you should be Premier of Ontario. What would you say?
I want the province of Ontario to be competitive. I want the workers in Ontario to be able to produce goods and services as good as anywhere else in the world. I want us to be able to compete with other parts of the world. I want Ontario to be caring, and I want Ontario to be fair. And I think that those three go together very well. If we have a caring and fair society, people will grow up believing they have a stake in our province, and they will work hard, and they will have the ability to participate in the world economy. And I think that the prosperity that comes from a competitive economy can help to pay for all the things like a caring and fair society.
Ted Hsu, MPP, Kingston and the Islands, potential candidate for the Ontario Liberal leadership and for the premiership of Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you very much for answering all my questions about different policy issues. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it too. Thanks for your interest.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Kingston and the Islands, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com, on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and anywhere good podcasts are posted. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great evening. Ted, I really appreciate it. Good luck in your candidacy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.